Time now for Overlooked Stocks. George Tsilis joins me to talk Joby Aviation. There's some news circling around Joby. Delta Airlines announced a SkyMile partnership yesterday. George, let's start out. Let's have that as our jumping off point. What does this, it seems like this is a multimodal deal, right? So what does this say about where Joby Aviation is going next?
Yeah, I think if you look at Joby Aviation and even one of the competitors in this, mobility space in terms of, these e-mobility transition types of technologies that are going to be mobile passenger vehicles like helicopters, and they're going to be electric. Essentially, these companies are the next stage of technology when it comes down to essentially transportation of passengers. And I think there's an element, of course, of new next gen technologies, but also an element associated with green energy. And there's been a lot of investments in these particular names, and I think the partnership with Delta is quite meaningful. Obviously, Delta seems to be very much involved in what's going on in this particular space. Delta did actually make an equity investment in Joby of up to $60 million, and they actually have now an allocation of close to $200 million that they're willing to invest in Joby. So I think this is an ongoing technology that is still part of their not necessarily design phase, but certification phase. Right now, if you look at companies like Joby and Archer, they're in the testing of their aerostructures phase, and this is part of the FAA certification, and they're expected to start launching their commercial e-taxi electric vehicle or takeoff and landing vehicles, eVTOLs as they call them, this particular year. And so we're essentially seeing the evolution of a new technology, and of course mainstay players in transportation. This would include companies like Uber in the rideshare space, but also companies like Delta, which we all know as a major domestic international airline. They're partnering up with these smaller players in electric takeoff and landing vehicles. And of course, Joby is one of the mainstay players in that space.
And so they're one of the mainstay players. What does this do now in terms of the differentiating it from its competitors? You just mentioned Archer and others in this space. I mean, does this create more runway for Joby to kind of be out in front?
Yeah, I think what's important behind these companies is, who's making investments in them. And I think if you just look at Joby, for instance, Delta obviously is making capital investments. They're actually taking capital infusion stakes, and that includes, equity stakes in the business. Toyota Motors also, just to give you some idea, is investing in Joby. They have about $500 million of investments. And if you just look at, for instance, Archer, these companies, or that company actually has a strategic partnership with the UAE, United Arab Emirates, to launch their technologies in that region of the world. So these are companies that are becoming very capital intensive, not just in their technologies in development. They need capital, but there's financial capital stakes being taken on by either national governments like the UAE, and even private partnerships like Toyota and, of course, Delta Airlines. So I think you have to consider, obviously, since the election, you're seeing some movement, particularly if you look at Joby. It's been moving higher, more than double since the election, and that's based upon the expectations for regulations, which, again, from the Trump administration standpoint, is expected to be very favorable towards new technologies and perhaps maybe accelerated adoption of these technologies relative to FAA regulations, which it's still, if you look at Joby and actually both these companies, even Archer, both of them are past the design phase of their stage of implementation. They're now in the certification phase, particularly the aerostructures, in which Joby is already testing with the FAA to certify their program.
You just mentioned what's been going on with regard to the momentum in its share price. I mean, the stock is up double digits so far this year, and we're not even, about a full week into the trading year, and the stock is up more than 50% year over year. Does it seem like that momentum will continue when it comes to Joby?
Well, that's a good question. So, based on what they say, they expect to have full certifications and to launch an actual, program flight by the end of this year. So, obviously, financial markets move at light speed, and the financial markets are moving first. It really comes down to expectations of sales. And again, if you look at the market capitalizations of Joby, it's over $7 billion, and sales are very low. It's less than $10 million in sales. So there's a lot riding on the stocks, with the expectations of certification being passed through this particular year. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see lots of volatility and potentially a pretty significant pullback, and that's to be expected in these names, because they will be issuing secondary shares to the market. And that's, again, something every business does, especially publicly traded ones, to raise capital to, again, make actual tangible investments in physical capital, and that includes technologies, equipment, personnel, which right now, again, is still expected to be certified by the end of the year. Now, things can change because the FAA may find a problem in the certification phase, but nonetheless, obviously the stocks have been moving significantly, and it also might be part and parcel of what's happening in the broader market, but also in the EV space, considering companies like Tesla, which have also been moving quite aggressively to the upside as of late.
All right, George Tsilis with a fresh analysis on Joby Aviation, senior markets contributor here on the Schwab Network. Thanks, George.